All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us wherever you are across the planet for the book launch, the virtual book launch of The Waste Between Our Ears by Gerry Gillespie. It's fantastic to be able to co-host this event. Gerry's put together an amazing book. And today we're going to launch it and celebrate it and explore the book and some of the ideas in it with some amazing special guests from all around the world. My name's David Hardwick. I'm an agroecologist at Soil Food. I'm your co-host for today, and our other co-host is Fiona George. G'day, Fiona. Thank you for coming along. Fiona is a vanilla grower and a soil health champion and extension officer in the wet tropics of Queensland. And both me and Fiona have worked with Gerry over the years on a number of projects and been inspired by his work. Hence, we were happy to be involved and really love to help him out. And our other co-host, of course, is the man himself. Gerry, welcome to your own book launch.
Thank you, David.
You're welcome. Yep, so terrific. And we've got a whole range of special guests who we're going to meet through the book launch. So we're excited to explore Gerry's book with them. But I'm going to hand over to Gerry now because I'd like Gerry to give us a little bit of a summary of the book and the journey that led him to writing the book. And then we might jump in and talk to each of our special guests about the book. So welcome everyone once again. And we look forward to discussing Gerry's new book with you over the next 40 minutes or so. Gerry, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, David. I'd like to begin by recognising the Indigenous owners of this land and pointing out that when the British arrived here to establish their penal colony in 1788, there was no waste at all because the landowners were part of a closed system. Indeed, they had a circular economy where the outputs of one process were the input of another. On what always was and always will be, of course, Aboriginal land, they were living in harmony with nature. Can I just take this opportunity to also say, as David did, how much I appreciate the attendance of all of you at this launch and also the agreement and enthusiasm of our special guests to participate. You'll see in the conversations to follow that their expertise covers a very broad range of skills, and all of them are individually, professionally, and collectively so important to the direction that our world needs to take to protect future generations. We all know COVID has forced us to go online to launch this book, and we are very fortunate in that we have attendees from around the world. The pandemic has had some positive impacts in that it has begun to teach us how to use our connections more effectively. Indeed, it has demonstrated that we can indeed make dramatic change to how we live on this planet when we need to. It has also demonstrated how we can function together as local communities and how much more we can live. By historically allowing ourselves unlimited access to the word waste as a function of our linear model of production, we've polluted our skies, our seas, and our land. We have thousands and thousands of tons of resources, which if handled differently would have provided thousands of local community jobs, a secure environment, and more beneficial outcomes for species now on the very edge of extinction. And is about change, and as such it is very timely, and that it can open doors as to how we might make productive and beneficial choices coming out of this pandemic. Change presents new options to help us rely once more on each other as secure and productive community members. As the late zero waste author and friend, Dr. Robin Murray once said, if we can open our eyes to the opportunities that await us in the valley of waste, we will find ourselves in a nirvana of opportunity. My thanks especially, just in closing, to Acres magazine, the publisher of the book, for the CEO, their patience and help over the past 12 months, and my thanks, of course, to all of you for attending. David will now introduce our next guest. Thank you.
Thanks, Gerry. Yeah, I was just thinking, looking at your title while you were talking, Gerry, that I've been to university, so there's probably a lot of waste between my ears. But anyway, that's all good. So yeah, it's a really fascinating title. So before I pass over to our first guest, I'd just like to share a little bit of experience I've had with Gerry. I first met Gerry nearly 8 years ago, it is, Gerry, and I was working on a compost project in northern New South Wales, Australia, and we were looking for some quality compost for our project. And I got shown some product from the local council which had the usual plastic and rubbish in it and looked like crap, to be frank. And I said, we're not going to use that. And 12 months later, we were still looking for some compost for the project. And I got shown compost from the same council site, same composting site from the local government, and it was completely different. It was high quality, there was no plastic in it, and I thought, oh, we could use this, and which is rare for a local government site. Often the compost is not great. So I went out to the compost site and had a look, and I was looking for a compost turner and the compost machinery, and I said, where's the compost turner? And there was just piles of stuff with plastic, with covers over it and tires on it, and I thought, this is not compost. You can't make compost like this. And I'd been involved with compost for many years, but it really challenged me, and I realized that there's new ways to do things, and that whoever had developed that sort of technique was very innovative. And I literally drove 600 kilometers to go and see Gerry after that day and explore, and that sort of led me to where I am now. And we've got a whole range of farmers across Australia that are basically using his techniques and helping really transform their farming system, which has really been really phenomenal. So that's sort of how I got involved, and Fiona sort of had a similar experience in the wet tropics where we've taken Gerry. So I guess just a bit of a background of why we're here and we're involved. And what I'd like to do now is bring in Ryan Slabaugh from Acres Magazine USA, which probably a lot of people will know who's watching in. Ryan's the CEO, and I guess, Ryan, you guys are the publishers. What is it about this book that you think's really relevant, not just for Australians and for us here, but also for you guys in the US and in the wider world?
It's a good question. At first glance, it might seem that it's a bit of a stretch for a bunch of soil health nerds who teach farmers soil health tactics to publish a book like this. But Gerry really sold us on the idea of the application for farmers and the ability to help fuel the regenerative agriculture movement that's happening well beyond the United States and around the world. And as Gerry mentioned, it's really both using modern tactics and returning to what we did so well for centuries, but forgot within the last half century or so. And just today I heard a story. I was sitting in an event and they were talking, there's a state here that actually pays its landfills to create compost, but as evidence of no farmers being in the room, they decided to contract that compost with the transportation department to spread in ditches. And so they're literally using this very valuable organic resource to put on our weeds in our ditches, instead of providing it as a free resource for our farmers, or a very cheap resource for our farmers and growers around there. So just one example of how we've got some waste between our ears here in the United States and can think differently. And certainly getting to know Gerry through the process. He's such a wonderful person, and he was so patient, and he learned that really patience, passion, resilience, all that is what it takes to publish a book. And I think that's the same skill set it will take to translate this book into real change out there in the world as well. So anyway, we're just really proud to represent Gerry and be here today. So thank you.
Yeah, great. No, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, and I guess, you know, this is the thing about Gerry's thinking. He's very interconnected and seeing how everything relates to each other. But the good news for your composted weeds in the ditch is that you can pay people to mow it more, so you can spend more rate money on mowers and contractors. Yeah, but it all links together, doesn't it? Yeah, no, thanks, Ryan. Well, thanks for being with us today. Our next special guest that's going to give a few thoughts on their relationship with Gerry and the ideas in his book is Fiona Armstrong. Fiona, welcome to our bash. Fiona, you're the CEO of Climate and Health Australia, which is a national medical practitioners group. And I guess, you know, soil health, compost and food all relate with each other. Sort of how do you see this book and Gerry's ideas sort of influencing climate and health and your efforts to grow healthier food for the population?
Thanks, David, and thanks, Gerry, for the invitation, and congratulations on a wonderful book. I'd like to also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. So we are on stolen land, and we're doing our best at the Climate and Health Alliance to listen and learn from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people about how we can be better allies and learn from them. As Gerry said, you know, the world's first circular economy, and all the lessons that are available to us are amazing. So I just want to say again, congratulations on the book, Gerry. It's not an easy topic to interest people in, but there are a few topics I think that are as important. I began my environmental career as a nurse fighting to introduce recycling programs in operating rooms. As someone who grew up on a remote sheep and cattle property, the volume of waste was just such an insult. And, you know, I've been aware my whole life that there is no away, as Julia Butterfly Hill's often quoted as saying. So I think this book is really important because the topic's important, but it's also such a great read, which is the really exciting aspect. Gerry's a great writer, and I think your knowledge and passion really shines through in the text. And I feel like you've made waste exciting and hopeful, and everybody's story, which is a real accomplishment. So I think our goal with waste, you know, must be not to have any and to use what might have been considered useless as a rich resource that Gerry argues very convincingly it is. So, you know, my work in health is one of the reasons why I care about waste, the materials and liquids and, you know, gases that we discard are threatening our health and well-being. The WHO, World Health Organization, estimates that 25% of all diseases have an environmental cause. I would argue that's an incredibly conservative estimate. So we're killing ourselves and other people with our waste, which is not a sensible thing to do. So there really is a lot of waste between our ears. I think this is a great book, and it makes an incredibly coherent case for change about how we deal with it. And listening to you talk about how it's going to be useful to farmers, I think it's going to be very useful for people in the health sector. I'm currently working on a zero waste policy with my co-housing community, and I feel like this is going to be a really wonderful reference for us. So thank you.
Oh, thanks very much, Fiona. And I guess just reflecting on what you're saying there, you know, I think one of the things about Gerry is that he's actually challenged right at the very fundamentals of this whole, the way we live on Earth. He's actually going back in the modern world and challenging a fundamental tenet of our life, which is that humans have to generate waste. And he's just gone right back and said, nope. And so it's been a really fundamental challenge across, not just agriculture. So that's great. Thank you very much for that and being part of today. Our next special guest is Mal Williams. Mal, you're from Wales. I've never met you, but I have had a little interaction with you on the email the other day. Welcome along. Hopefully it's not too late or too early in Wales at the moment. A long history in zero waste, and I know you and Gerry have been stirring the pot in Europe there for many years together, which is great. And so I guess with your knowledge of the history of recycling projects and the Welsh experience, which, having read Gerry's book, sounds like a really phenomenal one, do you think that, you know, recycling and transitioning the whole industry into these new ways of dealing with all of these substances that humans consume will get us out of this pandemic, but also help solve a lot of the societal problems that we have today? Sorry, Mal. Are you okay? Can you hear me now? Yeah, we can, Mal. Yep, you're on. Welcome.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the invite, and I'm really pleased to be here and to see some old friends that I've not met for a while. Yes, Wales is #1 in the UK for recycling. It's #2 in Europe and #3 in the world. Although I believe personally that it's #1 in the world because it's the stats they're looking at are a little bit unreliable in the other cases. But anyway,
I thought it's just because you're Welsh.
Whether we're first, second, or third, we're on the podium. You know what I mean? So it's fine. And I've been involved in recycling. I've got recycling between my ears. And when Gerry came along and said waste between our ears, we immediately gelled. And zero waste, and the realization, actually quite well into the process, that waste was a human mistake, probably the biggest human mistake of our whole existence on this planet, actually gelled. And when you actually look at it really closely, with waste not being a problem but being an opportunity, or being something that you need to change to make things better, what the beauty of being able to deal with waste is that everybody can do it, because everybody's making waste. So you can deal with it at the human level, the individual level, the community level, or the national or regional level. And the more but it all starts with the individual. And Gerry and I agreed very early on that there was one tenet, one principle of recycling, of getting rid of waste, that could not be compromised. And that was that you don't create waste in the first place. You put the materials out, whether they be paper, cans, glass, and all the rest of it, into separate containers, and you make sure that the collection system honors that separation. Separation at source is what it's called generally, and its opponent, its nemesis, is commingled collection, which is the way the waste industry wants to do it. And when you're cynical like I am now about the waste industry, you realize that the only reason the waste industry want to do it like that is because that's what they've always done. And they've made huge amounts of money doing it. And so when they're trying to satisfy their shareholder value, that's the way they go. Because it's much more profitable to actually build everything, big machinery, big investments from the banks and all the rest of it, to create a river of money that actually the guys at the top can fish from, than it is to actually say, let's do the simple thing, keep it separate, don't make the waste in the first place, because actually it's the cheapest way of doing it, and it's actually the least profitable way of doing it. So in a sense, we've got a system which is against the system, if you follow me. And we're trying to promote the system that actually is not that attractive to the people who want to invest. So it's a real dichotomy. And I know that Eric and people from the United States actually, you know, suffer from this batting their heads against the wall much more than we do in Europe, where at least we have some sort of regulation about things. But I'm very pleased to be supporting Gerry from those basic principles. I'm very pleased that that recycling has actually, you know, got somewhere in Wales, and Gerry was very much part of that, because when he came across and was talking to our people here with his Australian accent, they listened more than they listened to me with my whatever accent I haven't got. Okay, and vice versa. I used to come to Australia and talk in a little now and again in a Welsh accent, and apparently people listened to me there. So we swapped, and we had to ignore the fact that I was flying. Anyway, thank you for the invitation, and well, it looks like this is a good launch.
Fantastic, Mal. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, it is a phenomenon. We use that tactic in extension to help support change with farmers, is you just bring in a ring in from somewhere else and bring the same idea to the idea. But yeah, I guess your point there about just the fact that this whole, you know, the whole approach of source separation really challenges the institutional paradigm of the economic system, if you like, the model that's very entrenched. But that's all right. Taxpayers will subsidise it, so that's all good. But yeah, it is a big challenge that I guess you and Gerry and others in the zero waste movement have really been working on. And we see it here in Australia in local councils that do the good source separation, but it is such a challenge. So well done to you over there in Wales, being on the podium. And yeah, thank you for your time joining us. I'm going to hand over now to Fiona, our co-host, just to take us through the rest of the special guests. Fiona, next cab off the rank is Martin, so I'll let you introduce Martin and take over.
Thank you, David. Enjoy the rest of your day, and welcome everybody. So Martin, nice to see you. I haven't seen you for so long. Martin is a land care farmer in Australia, and he's known as a leader in agriculture and in regenerative agriculture in particular. Martin, it's a bit of an obvious question, but what part will agriculture play in answering some of the questions raised in Gerry's book?
Hi, Fiona. Hi, everybody. Gerry, thank you very much for inviting me onto this panel. I feel very privileged myself because I've known Gerry and Carol for a long time, and Peter, his brother, and Hannah, his niece, and been involved in a lot of Gerry's projects. Braidwood, which is very near, which is in New South Wales for those people overseas, and near where Gerry lives. He spent a lot of time helping us over the years, setting up initially worm farms and those sort of things, but we now have static compost systems using his inoculants and those sort of things that have greatly helped me as a farmer. I've also been pulled into some of his projects like the Majors Creek Folk Music Festival, where we've recycled everything from the folk festival, all the urine I've used for pushing succession in serrated tussock, a weed, but all the other things we composted down on my farm, and Gerry and Carol came and helped set that all up, gave us the inoculants and those sort of things. So, sorry, Fiona, your question was, how's it helping farmers?
Well, how is agriculture going to get involved in
right. Yeah. So I was a traditional farmer where we were using chemicals and all those things, and we were on that path of killing things and planting things and thinking. I was actually thinking, reading Gerry's book, there's some great song lines out of his stuff. Before I used to kill, plant, and then sell, and now I read the land, encourage plants to grow, and enjoy the rewards. So where Gerry's knowledge has helped me is that we've been able to understand how we can recycle nearly everything. You know, it's now materials, not waste. And so on my farm, I've been able to build these static compost heaps high up in the landscape, and then all the fertility can then use gravity to fertilise my whole farm. So our production costs have dramatically dropped, and our ability to harvest carbon, to hold water and all those things have dramatically increased. Today, I'm actually on the Maloon Creek Natural Farms, where we've just built a big static compost heap, again, with Gerry's knowledge, and putting inoculants in there, some of his and also some biodynamic ones, to process what was a waste into a very valuable product for the chicken farm and for the fertility of the land. So I thank Gerry from the bottom of my heart. I loved reading his book. The bit at the beginning where he thanks those who've obstructed us, I sent him an email straight away saying, that is so pertinent to where I am at the moment. And yes, it is great to look at all these hindrances that we've all had over the last 40 years that I've been in this game, as people who have pushed us to get better at what we do. So yeah, it's such a positive book. It's such a great insight into all the different processes that have happened for him over the last decades. And I'm privileged to be part of the team.
Thank you very much, Martin. I also really liked that bit about how, you know, pushing back against those who obstruct us really encourages us to be innovative and to hang in there and follow our hearts and our ideologies. So thank you very much, Martin.
Fiona, sorry to jump in. I just had a slight admin thing. I need Fiona Armstrong's help because I made Fiona Armstrong the host instead of you. So Fiona Armstrong, would you mind making Fiona George the host? Otherwise we're going to have problems. So apologies, everyone. I'll let you keep going, but hopefully you can sort that out, Fiona. Thank you.
Okay.
Right. See you, everyone.
Thanks, David. We're now going to jump across the ditch, as we say in this part of the world, from Australia to New Zealand. Kia ora, Max. Max Purnell is a dairy farmer in my home country, New Zealand, and I'd love to hear your perspectives on agriculture and waste from New Zealand, and also perhaps looking at the Māori versus Pākehā views on waste, so Indigenous versus non-Indigenous. Thanks, Max. You'll have to unmute yourself. Can you do that now, or do you want me to do that?
How's muted me?
Okay, we've got you now.
You got me now? Very good. Well, kia ora tātou. Hello, everyone. And good to be very honoured, actually, to be part of Gerry's world. And I've been wondering how to relate the book to us in New Zealand and whatnot. I guess it reminded me of when a friend of mine who fundamentally is changing the way that the fishing industry is operating in New Zealand, he rang me, a bit 10, 15 years ago, he rang me and said, I've got a real problem, he said, with the way that bureaucracy operates. Do you know an inspiring bureaucrat? And I wandered off for a bit and I said, look, I'll get back to you on that. And I rang him the next day and said, yes, I can. Unfortunately, though, he's Australian. And I nominated Gerry Gillespie. And Gerry in time came and spoke with that gentleman, and Gerry's connected to a vast array of different people around the globe, and it's his helping the evolution of thought, I think, was the way in which I'd like to describe him in the book. You know, we all tend to think, oh, there's a real barrier, but actually evolution's upon us all the time, and Gerry's way ahead of the game on that. I bumped into Gerry, back in the early 1990s when we ended up in a car having a look at South Australia and biochar together, which was very good to do. But I still recall him hauling up alongside of the road when we'd got to trying to describe how our two countries had evolved. And, I'm a chip of sitting on farming on a chip of old Australia. You know, that's a continental drift reality. He leaps out of the car, hauls the car to a hole, leaps out and pulls some flowers off a plant and unrolls the fractals in front of me and points out that they're very similar species to our Pahudakawa, and here's how it unrolled. And that's the sort of forward thought that you get out of his inquiring mind. And so he's able to ask the obvious questions, about what we think we know and why we know it. And I've really enjoyed being around Gerry for that, as we've worked our way through a whole range of subjects that have leapt forward in the consciousness of the globe, really. On-ground local knowledge is what Gerry stems from. And that's the beginnings of all good science. Observation first. So thank you, Gerry, for that. And that brings us to the absolute deep respect of Indigenous understandings. And in terms of New Zealand farmer and how we operate here, or operating here, Gerry is way ahead of the game in understanding the Tao Māori that's now being put forward by our government. Thank you, Gerry, for your help in the thinking that went there, that all humans are tightly connected to the natural world. And the vision for agriculture now produced by our MPI is very much a part of that. So Gerry used to come and just all wander around the country here, and I've been in other parts of the globe with him, and he asked that essential question of people: where does your soil come from? Sorry, where does your food come from? You know, and just connects people to the soils that way. And I like to describe myself when people ask as a soils first farmer, because that just simply asks the question of before you've made any decision about your farming life, what is the impact on the soils? Before you do anything, it should be at the top of the list of your risk assessment. And Gerry's work, his textbook, I would argue that his book is a textbook that should be for anybody that's interested in the interconnectedness of life and the way it all fits together, that they'd read his book, particularly when it came to the waste management. You know, Gerry moved on to the biostimulants. I attended in 2000 and something or other for my own interest, international biostimulants understanding, because I thought that was the way forward. But Gerry was a jump ahead of that again. He was building his biostimulants. He was inquiring into what we thought we knew. And now the world's caught up because, hey, we got this thing now. We can now measure the gene expressions of such things, and so it's measurable now. And so suddenly his work's vogue. So I keep banging on for a long time about Gerry, but I'd like to say that that from a Māori perspective, he represents the word kotahitanga, which is just working together. And I've really enjoyed that international time with him, and it's good to see some old faces there. And g'day, Mel, you know, from Wales. It was always just a very good thing to do. So well done, Gerry. Honoured to be part of what you've done, and just keep cracking on, bro.
Kia ora, Max. Thank you very much. Thank you for that unique perspective from across the ditch. We're now coming back to Australia, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Sarah Beavis. Sarah has a very special part to play in this story. She is from the Australian National University, a senior research fellow, and she has had a major contribution to the research going into Gerry's book. From a research perspective, Professor, what do you feel is the future there, and how is it going to contribute to change in the future, do you think?
Thanks very much, Fiona, and thank you for the invitation. I should say that I've known Gerry for a long time. I think I've known him for over 40 years, and we've worked together for 20, and they've been really fun, exciting, stimulating, and intellectually innovative period of time that I've worked with him. So I'd really like to thank you, Gerry, for those opportunities. I think the book itself is very much a call to arms. And I think I repeat something that Fiona said earlier, that it's hopeful, but it's also very accessible. And I notice that, you know, the audience that is identified on the back of the book, advocates, non-profit directors, waste managers, landfill directors, environmentalists, and so on and so on. It's a very broad audience that's being targeted. And I think that the research that Gerry and I have done in the past has really involved that broad audience. I sort of think back and reminisce about some of the things that we've worked on. We've gone from working on sort of organics and the potential to increase yield in grapes, but we've gone to sewage treatment plants. We've looked at landfill sites and looked at human waste as an organic source material. We've macerated feral pigs. And we've worked out in the agricultural landscape, you know, just a really wide range of applications of research looking at organics and how they can be used. I think when we look at the future and what a future of uncertainty I think that we're all embracing currently, we have, there is immense opportunity and applicability of the work that Gerry has done and is advocating and supporting. And I see that really the sky's the limit in future applications of this way of thinking. I think the book, the scope of the book just really identifies just how much can be done. I think just for now, something that I would possibly focus on is we've heard a lot about the rural sector so far. I also find the urban sector really interesting because of the vast numbers of the human population that's increasing and moving into urban areas, and how this is going to place enormous stresses in various sectors within the urban landscape. And I see that the urban reimagining, the need for urban communities and urban councils to start thinking about ways of producing food, creating green space that will survive under increasingly hot and dry circumstances. There's a real need for the sort of information that is derived from our research to feed into that urban reimagining and green space, food sustainability, and looking at different ways in which urban communities and urban councils can work together to make the urban environment more livable. So whether we like it or not, we're moving into, and we're right in it now with COVID, a period of immense change and adaptation, but with it comes the need for resilience. And I think that's a key component of the work that Gerry has done. It's a way in which we can build resilient systems and in which we ourselves can assist in becoming resilient communities. So enormous potential for further research. And I also think that it's not just looking at communities and councils and decision makers as well as individuals and the partnerships that we can build from a scientific perspective and from a practical perspective. But I also think there's enormous potential there for social research. I just think back on the success of the anti-litter campaigns that were run, I think in the 70s or the 80s here in Australia, and just how successful they were and how there was societal change that was effected. I think we can do the same with waste and the way that waste can be, again, thought of as byproducts of other processes and how we can reuse and recycle, but also reduce the generation of that material. So social research into how can we get certain groups to start embracing the concepts of waste reduction, recycling and reuse, and especially in the developing world, how we can place greater responsibility on those who actually create that material in the first place. And I think also thinking about the mechanisms by which it becomes a shared responsibility across all sectors. So with that, I'd like to, I hope I've answered your question. And I'd like to congratulate Gerry very much and to thank him for being such a wonderful colleague over these many years. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I think your comments really highlight what's at the crux of Gerry's book is about the interconnectedness and how we really have to look at every thread and every part of our community and how we can all work together to deal with these problems. Thank you. I'm just going to now change it up a little bit. We have Minister Chris Steele now with us. Chris is responsible for recycling and other services provided by the ACT government, so the Australian Capital Territory in Australia. And due to some technical difficulties, he's wasn't able to join us straight away, but Chris, now that you're here, welcome. And I'd just like to ask you really to explain to our audience how, what kind of impact you think this book can have, particularly on your work and your policies, and how you feel that this can be integrated into the work that you do. Thank you. Oh, there you go. Okay, I'm going to unmute you.
There it is. Thanks, everyone. I have been on throughout the session, but I think as a guest earlier, I'd like to start by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on in a dispersed fashion here in the ACT. That's the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to elders past and present, but also acknowledge that they've been successfully managing our lands and our soils for thousands of years. I'd like to congratulate Gerry and also acknowledge the other guests here today. This is a fantastic book and a very timely one. I think it really documents the over 30 years of experience that Gerry brings to this area of recycling and resource management. And that's exactly the point of this book, which is come through loud and clear, is the need to think differently about waste, not as waste, but as a resource that we can all use, but particularly organic waste, And that is something that I think is very timely for us here locally, because we are embarking on this journey at the moment of trying to reduce the amount of organic material, particularly going into our landfill, and using it and taking the opportunity, seizing that opportunity, which Gerry has, I think, very eloquently described in the book, about actually engaging the community before we actually start collecting this waste, about the importance of this waste as a valuable resource, perhaps the most valuable resource that we have, and then engaging them in a discussion about how that might contribute to better soil health. And there's a huge opportunity here that I think a lot of people do acknowledge. We've just been through an election campaign where we've brought to the election a policy of actually wanting to collect food waste, food organics, in addition to green garden waste. And as I've been out talking with the community over the last few months, I've had a number of people, after describing what our policy is on this matter, gardeners actually saying, no, you're not going to take my waste. This is too valuable. This is going in my garden to support, the growing of vegetables and so forth. So I think there are a group of people who really understand the benefit of this material. But of course, we've got to also engage with the broader community as well as reducing the amount of food waste that we've got in the first place. So Gerry's experiences here are valuable, and what I love about Gerry's book is not only the clear advocacy in the book and the documentation of his vast experiences from Cairo right through to Armidale and beyond. I think that's been really useful as from a case study point of view, comparative point of view, but also the really simple tips that he actually provides throughout the book on how we can better manage our resources, and how governments can also get involved, particularly through source separation, but also through regulation. And I think that's a key component that I think we're really interested in tackling, because at the end of the day, I think Mal mentioned this as well, the recycling industry is doing what they're doing just because that's the way they've always done it. And I think that's the role that the government can play in terms of regulation, saying, no, enough's enough. We're just going to ban this stuff. This stuff is not going to come into the system to begin with. And we're about to do that through a plastic reduction bill, which will deal with those consumer facing products and banning some of those. But as Gerry mentioned in the book, we also need to be thinking about all of the other products that are coming that aren't consumer-facing products that we don't necessarily see every day that are coming through our supply chains and so forth, and managing those as well. So I think there's a lot more room for regulation in that space. Some of that will be our responsibility as a territory government. Others will be nationally. We need to continue to advocate for that. So thank you, Gerry, for your wisdom, your experience. We look forward to drawing on that and continuing the discussion with you as we embark on this really exciting journey, particularly around organic reduction, but also in improving our broader recycling system.
Thank you very much, Chris. We actually had a question from a participant who asked, is the ACT government moving towards separation at source? And I think you've alluded to it, but I wonder if you could perhaps provide a little more detail around intention there.
Sure. Well, the first and the biggest priority that we have, which was the election commitment that we've made, is to remove food organics from our garbage waste stream, and we're doing that through a separate bin, which we have already rolled out to 50% of households for garden waste, and we'll be adding food waste to that. So that will separate it from the garbage waste. It's a 3-bin system. It's not the 50-bin system of Wales. I'm exaggerating there, but so we're not quite there yet. But that's the priority, is getting organics out first, and then we can continue to work and learn from the experience of other jurisdictions in relation to other source separation. Expanding the container deposit scheme is another thing that's on my priority list, to other products that aren't currently in the container deposit scheme system. things that have been sort of opportunities are, you know, wine bottles and things like coffee cups and so forth. And I know that Gerry, in his book, has been talking about how that might be achieved with plastic bags and so forth, or having a source separation system using plastic bags that are tagged to actually better separate materials in an environmentally friendly way. So we're certainly keen on expanding the work of source separation. I think Victoria's now introduced a fourth bin. We're interested in seeing what the outcomes of that are for glass and how we can better improve our system. But at the moment, the focus is squarely on organics, mainly because it's the fourth largest source of emissions for us as well. And that's the other point that this book makes, is the key role that soils can play, but also removing organics from our waste stream can play in tackling climate change, reducing methane emissions.
Thank you very much. We do have more questions, but if you are able to stay online, Chris, perhaps we could come back to them later. I'm just mindful of time and making sure that we cover everything. Would that be okay? Thank you. I am now going to introduce Eric Lombardi. Eric is the fellow founder of the Zero Waste International Alliance from the United States. And Eric, we're going to hear from you about the impact of Gerry's book, or in your view, the impact of Gerry's book on the future of recycling in your part of the world and indeed across the world. So thank you, Eric.
Thank you. I'm glad to be there. Gerry, congratulations on getting that book that's been inside you for many years out into print. Good job. So I want the reader to know that this book is full of pearls of wisdom, just as Gerry has been over the 25 years that I've known and worked with him. As a matter of fact, it was in the mid-90s that he really shook up the recycling world in the United States when we all read about this thing called No Waste by 2010 in ACT. And some of us passed that around to each other and said, is this guy for real? He's talking no waste? Well, it didn't take us long to realize what he was talking about, and that the light bulb went off and we realized recycling is just the beginning. And the zero waste movement was born. And Gerry, I've often called you the godfather of it, and thank you for that brilliant thought that the rest of us grabbed onto, and the world's never been the same. I'd like the readers to know that there's other brilliant thoughts in this book. And this book can be important for the next generation of activists who want to see a sustainable and zero waste world. And there's so many things I could talk about, but I'll just talk about three. In fact, the subtitle of the book for me was Community, Economy, and Organics. And so I'll just say something about community. Gerry in the book talks about the value of community benefit, the value of having a community strategy. And the point of all of that is, as was just mentioned, regulation is needed to create the future, the zero waste future that we need. And you're not going to get regulation without community support. And so we need the community to be educated, engaged, and as Mal said, everybody creates waste, so everybody has an opportunity to participate. So this whole idea of community is key, and it's throughout the book. And the second point, economy, you know, there's no shortage of solutions. As Gerry's book describes, there are solutions on the shelf. What we're missing is political will and the economic rewards. And so I really like the new phrase he's come up with when he talks about alternative models of economic efficiency. I've never seen economic efficiency quite before. And I was thinking about that. What the heck does that mean? And I realized that what he was saying, and he does say in the book, that we have some new ideas called circular economy and social enterprise. And these happen to be my focus now in my career, is the whole social enterprise approach. I ran a large zero waste social enterprise in the States. And the reason the economic approach needs to be altered is because we have got environmental externalities from our current market system that are not being paid for. We have groundwater pollution, we have air pollution, we have resource depletion, we have social justice issues. We have so many things that are what the economists call market failures. And they've been being studied and discussed for 50 years. They're just not going to get fixed. And so we need to take a new philosophical approach to what he's calling economic efficiency. And I think that's a brilliant idea that we need to start discussing. The other thing I've said before, and I'll say again, slavery didn't end because of a spreadsheet that showed that the market economics weren't working anymore. Slavery ended because it was a moral imperative. And we've come to that same place with our planet. It's time for a moral imperative to change the way we're going. And finally, I'll close with the idea that he has dropped another key thought on us. And that is that the most important point of engagement, and I like how he said that, point of engagement, for the new community and the new economy is organic waste and how we manage it. That should be our focus. And I thought hard about that. I've been thinking about that ever since he told me about it over 20 years ago. And he's right, because once we take care of the organics in a sustainable and thoughtful way, then the technological discards and everything else falls in behind it. So Gerry, I hope the next generation of zero waste activists picks up on some of your big thoughts in this book. It is a guidebook for going forward. And congratulations. Thanks for the book.
Thank you so much, Eric. And again, this moral imperative, I think, is incredibly important. And it does underpin everything that Gerry is saying, and this interconnectedness and our understanding of the way we work in the environment and in our planet. Thank you very much. We have 10 minutes left, or we have a little bit longer. I wonder whether we could perhaps, Jackie, could I ask you, could we answer a couple of the questions from the participants before we hear from you? Are you okay with that? All right, thank you.
Yes, yes, of course.
All right, thank you. So in the chat, I've written some questions for both Chris and Mel that have come from the audience. One of them is, let me just go back to it. So Brian says, I'm on board with recycling the nutrients we take from the soil and returning them back to the soil. Awesome. And no worries recommending material where farmers and land managers control their waste stream and 100% know its pedigree. But I'm reluctant in recommending recycled products to farmers outside of this limited circle due to quality control issues. So the question is to Gerry, how do we deal with this quality control issue so that land managers can have confidence? And he would also like to hear Mel's perspective on this from Wales and also from Chris. So just briefly, Gerry, could you give us your views, and then we'll go to Mel and then to Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. Some years ago, now it's 2003, we ran a trial here in Queanbeyan, where I live, of a program called City to Soil, which was, as Sarah knows, was later expanded into a $2 million project that covered 4 council areas. There were a lot of things that came out of that, but the key to all of that was source step, not just giving the public a bin and expecting them to do the right thing. What we did was we maintained that people had to have the right tools, the right motivation and the right information before they engaged in the process. And so through City to Soil, we found, particularly in Armidale, where it is still running, Armidale in New South Wales, the contamination rate very, very seldom got even close to 0.5%. In most of the trial areas, it was well below that. It was probably 0.2%. The reason why that happens is we just said to people, we need this material clean because it's going into soils to grow your food for your children, and people get that. It's a simple idea. The difficulty with the sort of thing that Brian talks about is that a lot of councils are just giving people a bin and expecting people to this whole notion of separation by osmosis. And of course, it doesn't work. Some people, when you say yard waste, they throw anything into that bin that's in their yard. So you've got to get them engaged. They've got to be excited. They've got to understand. And Chris Steele would be aware of this too. In the first collections they did in Canberra, they had almost no contamination. They had this remarkable young woman who was out there all the time talking to the public about how to keep it clean. The source separation is fundamental to it, Fiona.
Thank you very much, Gerry.
Thank you.
Quickly to Mel on the quality assurance issue. Oh, just a moment, I have to unmute you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to be repeating really what Gerry said. It all starts with source separation, not creating waste in the first place. But I think a word of explanation is also worthwhile. The word contamination, coming from the mouths of critics, generally doesn't explain what contamination actually is. All contamination is in the waste industry is one material mixed with another. And that could be paper with glass, glass with metals, metals with plastics, plastics with anything, glass with anything. And one of the things we found in Wales, because we decided very early on that mainly because of the landfill directive, which came out of Europe, which basically said we had to reduce the amount of organic waste going into landfill by the year 2016, and then that was extended to 2020, was that when we actually kitted out all the people in Wales, 96% of the households in Wales got a little tiny 6-litre kitchen caddy with plastic, recyclable plastic inserts and a 20-litre bin to put out on the side that separated out the food waste from every other organic waste, because we had to do that in the UK because we have what is known as the animal byproducts regulations, which was something which came to us after the BSE crisis and foot and mouth disease. So we've got a rather strange circumstance, which means we can't actually collect food waste together with garden waste like you can in Australia. So we're very envious of you being able to do that because it's much easier. But anyway, the net result was, and the surprising result was that our recycling rate shot up 10% within a 2-year period, and people were all reporting how it made them realize just how much food they were wasting and things like that. So it changed their buying patterns. We were expecting 3 kilograms-ish average in a household in Wales, and we actually got slightly less than 2, but within a couple of weeks of starting. We got 3 kilograms to start with. This is a weekly collection, and this is average. 3 kilograms, as you know, averages are not all that meaningful, but this is what we expected. And now it's settled to about 1.8 kilograms. So there was a reduction in people purchasing food to start with, so that was good. And also a realization that when they separated out the stuff, all the other recycling went up as well. Because A, the bin wasn't so mucky. You didn't mind putting your hands in to get the cans out from the glasses and all that sort of thing. And even if you were asked to put it out, and it's not 50 bins, Chris, it's I think the maximum we got is about 5. The only place I know with 50 bins is actually in Japan, in Kamakatsu, where they have 50 bins to take anything, and that's a really good system. If you want to see a 50 bin system, pop across to Japan and have a look. It's brilliant. But anyway, yeah, and so concentrating on the organics, getting the mucky stuff out, also raised the tone of the conversation, because as Gerry and I, and Eric and others have had conversations in the past, it's the Cinderella. Nobody wants to talk about waste, really, even though everybody hates waste. It's yucky stuff. Let's just get it out of the way. And, okay. And in the past, it was sent into landfills or sent off to incinerators. But the most important thing was it was sent off. There was an away, and it was away from your house. But this brought the conversation back home. And I think where we are now, with all the increasing conversations about regenerative agriculture, growing your own food, becoming more resilient, knowing where your food comes from, or the quality of food. I love Max did a lovely video where his daughter was actually explaining to somebody from the television in New Zealand, and the interviewer said, "So why have you got so many weeds in your field?" And his daughter responded almost angrily, almost punched him on the nose, I think, and said, "These aren't weeds, it's a salad for my cows." And so the whole thing about concentrating on food and concentrating on getting the food waste out does have a really, really, really good effect in being able to open up the conversation and make it more accessible. And I would say now we're doing schools projects here massively in young people. They get it really, really fast, and they love getting involved with actually doing something different other than just popping down to Tesco's and buying their carrots. They love growing them. So it's a win-win to get involved like that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mel. Just very quickly, mindful of time. Chris, have you got anything to add there about quality assurance that future customers can be assured that they're getting a good product?
Well, I think as Gerry mentioned, we've had a very successful low contamination rate for the garden organics. So because we've actually invested quite a significant amount of money in that education phase, and because we're sort of laggards to this, other jurisdictions, other local councils have actually done this well before us, and they've had very high contamination rates. We've learned from them that the education is critical, and that people actually understand that where their waste is going, and it's that trust factor, I think, as well, and knowing that it will actually be returned to local agriculture or through compost that you can buy at your local hardware store. The other thing is, at the moment, we're focusing on household organic collection, but I think there is a much greater risk of contamination with regard to commercial organic collection from hospitality businesses and so forth. And we've got to do a bit of work on that as well. I think the opportunity there is to go local. I think that's one of the messages from Gerry's book, is to make sure that local solutions tend to be ones that help to reduce that contamination rate. And so with the commercial providers, we do have a large number of smaller organic waste businesses that might be able to work directly with businesses, make much more of a connection with them to understand that the sorts of things that they can take and what they can't take to reduce those contamination levels. So that's the opportunity there, and I think that's something we'll work on over the next few years.
Thank you. And actually there was another question for you, Chris, which is very similar to that, which was, would the government consider regulating no food waste to landfill for the commercial sector? So I think sort of answered that really, haven't you?
The answer is yes, we will. And there's already a target that all Australian governments have put in place to reduce organic waste by 30%.
Right, thank you. Gerry, well, this is a question for several people, but perhaps, Gerry, you'd like to give us your views. What is the best advocacy lever in engaging reluctant local councils on food waste and source separation?
I think possibly the demonstration's already there in different areas. The Armidale Council were very, very successful. Looked at, and it's interesting that what Chris is trying to do in the ACT, there'll always be pushback from the waste industry. And I think Mal alluded to that before, and certainly Eric's been through these problems. When you have commercial operators who make lots and lots of money out of taking waste the way it is, they tend to push back against it. But probably the best way to engage people in the process is actually use the effective and efficient ways things that are happening now, like as Chris said with their collections. Armidale's a wonderful council to go and look at. You need to look at the system and see how other people have implemented it. And that, I think, is the best way to get reluctant councils to engage in the process, because there's a lot of money to be saved and a lot of community benefit to be gained from changing over to a source separation system. Thanks, Fiona.
Thank you. We do have other questions coming in, but I know that we have a time constraint, so I'll forward those questions on to Gerry and the other panelists. If you do have, our participants, our audience, if you do have questions and you'd like to share a contact perhaps an email address or some way that we can follow up with you, please put it in the chat, and we'll pass that on to the relevant panelists. But thank you all for your participation. It's great to have a discussion. We are going to wrap up now, and we're very delighted to have author Jackie French with us today. Jackie's also a former Senior Australian of the Year, a very honoured position, and she, I think, is going to, well, I'll just leave it to Jackie to bring us something delightful and remind us of the humanity that we all are. Thank you.
These are Gerry's words to start the book launch. The first poem in his book, Science and the Arts. The balance of this earth sublime, as nature has intended, lives constantly within the stress humanity invented. The challenge of the times is this, if we can only face it. If science be what we design, the art is not to waste it. We are a clever species. We have always been a clever species. I live on the land of the Alaluan and the Darugha people of the Yuin Nation. And the area where I live is still a small island, which is carved from the thousands and 10,000 years of their creation. It is a place where we are pretty much zero waste, partly because Palarang Council hasn't given me access to rubbish bins, but mostly because this still works, that we don't have garden waste, we don't have farm waste, we still have lyrebirds. One lyrebird can move 155 tons of soil and organic matter a year. We have bandicoots, we have bettongs, but we can no longer rely on the natural ecosystems which have nourished humanity ever since we have been a species. Here we have got pollution from the farmers upstream and their erosion gullies. We've got feral animals. We have got the extraordinary vanishing of our wildlife due to the bushfires and the bushfire winds and weather that came with it. This is no longer possible. I met Gerry, I think, probably more decades ago than either of us would like to count. He was the probably insane brother of Peter Gillespie, who founded the Majors Creek Music Festival. And Gerry had come up with the completely insane idea of turning a music festival into zero waste. You cannot turn a music festival into zero waste where people are having takeaway food, etc., etc., etc. You cannot do this. He did it within the first year. Gerry had the completely insane idea of convincing a council that they could make compost on a large scale, the City to Soil project. This is impossible, or it was impossible way back then, decades ago. Gerry did it. Gerry did the impossible. Gerry has done the impossible in the last few decades. He's taken composting from what people did in their backyards, but usually they didn't do it properly anyway, and just created a place for fruit fly and various other pests. Gerry has taken that not just to council level or state level or national level, but internationally. He has done the most extraordinary job. Yesterday, quite by coincidence, I saw two things. The first was the notice that the Australian federal government's recycling fund has spent no money out of all of their allocation. I have to make it very, very clear to international guests here that the Australian federal government has no connection whatsoever with all of the fabulous initiatives of the ACT government and the various other state initiatives in Australia. The other one was quite coincidence, being on radio, listening where there is a recycling festival in South Australia where a bloke was calling everyone in industry, saying that they could recycle plastics, any plastics, saying that, look, whatever you need in large enough quantities, that will make it commercially viable for us to provide. You ask what you want in terms of plastic and we will do it. Now, I don't know if that is true, but because of Gerry, because of people that Gerry has inspired, those are the things that are being talked about now. Now, there is an enormous amount of fluff in recycling. There is an enormous amount of fluff about sustainability. There are so many claims by so many people, corporations, etc., about what they are doing, which is all very nice and fine and will save the world. And when you get to it, they're actually not doing it. It's talk. But this isn't Gerry. Gerry did it. Gerry has been doing it for decades. And this is the extraordinary thing about this book. It is a record of not just what can be done, but what has been done. Not just literally on the ground or in the ground, but yes, in the wasteland between people's heads. It is the most extraordinary book. I thought it would be bigger. I expected it to be much, much bigger. But like Gerry's work, it is extraordinarily dense. Seek and you will find. The wonderful thing about a book, and particularly about a book like Gerry's, is that books last long after the author can no longer speak. A book written 2,500 years ago can still speak to readers today. This book is not just an inspiration to the future, it is a record of how far we have come because of Gerry and people like him in the last 20 or 30 years. This is a book that will last. It is a book that will go in places where Gerry can never speak. Humans as a species are going to have to adopt the circular economy. We are either going to adopt it by choice or from desperation, simply because with poverty and pollution and global change and social breakdown, we have no choice but to live on the detritus of a decayed civilization. What are we going to choose? Are we going to choose the prosperous circular economy, or are we going to go on, I was going to say our present trajectory, but luckily, thanks to people like Gerry, thanks to people like all of you, humanity doesn't go on one trajectory. We go on many trajectories. And with a bit of luck, the circular economy, Gerry's economy, is the one that we are going to follow and survive. I'd like to finish with the last poem in Gerry's book. I found it very moving. A lot of the Indigenous history of Australia, talking about the first foot on Australian soil, they all have a woman who is the person putting the first foot, carrying the plants on her head. And I found this poem extraordinary as an ending. And there she sat straight-legged on seaside sand, her feet in waves washed clean from years of toil. Exhausted tears rolled down upon her cheek to meet with water's edge in quiet relief, or going home and adding salt to salt. She cried for wind which longed to grip her skin. She cried for rain no longer falling into tide. She cried for man's simplicity, a short-lived work of wonder, a failed attempt of kind, of justice limp and lost, that could not listen to the heart of hearts. Where to now in this listless soul of sea? No more the ears to hear the song of birds, to understand the language of the loved, to feel a water's chill, a warmth of sun. She knows the end has come. The rising tide upon her legs responds unto the moon unto the stars unto eternity. And there sits she, the mother of it all, and cries and cannot stop the tears. It's with great joy, great honour, great privilege that I would like to launch Gerry Gillespie's book, The Waste Between Our Ears, not just to this generation, the generation still at school, but the generation still at come, because these words have spoken to us and will continue to speak generation after generation. Thank you, Gerry, more than it is possible to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all
So much, Jackie. I suppose we also need to know where we can buy the book. Acres USA are the publisher. Ryan, could you tell us where we can buy the book?
Yeah, at the risk of spoiling Jackie's great ending at this point. Yes.
I know, it's like, how do we do this?
Wonderful, yes. But yes, we'd love everybody to order the book and spread the word. Gerry's hard work went into it. You can order it through the Paper Chain Bookstore in Australia, or outside of Australia, you can order it through acresusa.com. If you order it through us, you can use the code WASTE and save 10% off the book. Also, you can find it on Amazon and Apple, and hopefully as many places as we can find to put it in the coming months. So thank you again for the support behind this, and thanks for everybody joining us today.
Thank you, Ryan. And Jackie, I'm glad we have low res on the video, because see my tears as well with that beautiful poem. Thank you, Gerry. Thank you to all our panelists, and thank you to all the people from around the world who've joined us. You're a wonderful audience. I can't see you, but all the comments in the chat shows how connected we really are. And there is hope, and all of you, some of you seem to already be activists in your own domains. So let's use this book to further those aspirations and bring us all together.
Thank you, and thank you all for attending and all your words. And also too, if anybody in the Canberra area, we do have a book signing at Paper Chain tomorrow. But really, it's been lovely to see you all, and thank you for such a wonderful event. Thanks, Fiona.
Okay. Until next time, next book. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Gerry.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Jackie. Bye-bye.
Right. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Gerry. That was beautiful.
I think you're still there.
Hello, Gerry from New Zealand.
Bye, everyone. Gerry, are you still there?